Hi, everyone. It's Lisa from Been There, Got Out. And tonight's guest has been on here before, but it's been quite a while. It's Melissa Cohen, and she's from Seiden Family Law in New Jersey. And there she is. Yay. We're going to be talking about past in New Jersey and the impact that it has on New Jersey people as well as the rest. Oh, good. Always like such a relief. Instagram does this weird thing where it's like a phone starts ringing. I don't know
How'd we
why.
do?
Good.
All right. Better than last time.
Yes, yes. Now you don't have a glowing halo around your head.
I'm an angel. That's what they say.
All right. So, Melissa, for those people that don't already know you, can you briefly introduce yourself? Because you and I have known each other for a little while now.
Friends for a while now. I'm Melissa Cohen, a family law attorney at Seiden Family Law, Cranford, New Jersey. And you and I got hooked up as friends and colleagues because you deal in high conflict divorce situations. We deal in all divorce situations at high conflict, but also we have exchanged a lot of thoughts and ideas on domestic violence and how to help people in a high conflict situation.
Yes, and you're one of those unicorn attorneys we say could because you are trained and have some knowledge about domestic violence because everyone in our community is always looking for attorneys who know something about this so that they feel a bit more understood, even though that's not technically your job. It always helps to have attorneys who have some kind of sensitivity to the issues regarding clients' lives.
Definitely. I mean, we do all areas of family law here in particular, right? We always talk about this and, sometimes people say it in jest, but it's true. This is my favorite case type to deal with. I mean, obviously we make a lot of positive change for our clients when we do a divorce, but when I'm involved in a domestic violence case, I really feel that and really feel those results, whether you're protecting a victim or what we always say, right? And a defendant who's innocent and falsely accused is also a victim, right? So we do represent people on both sides of the coin.
Yeah, that's
right. It's true. But yeah, here in New Jersey, there is a lot of overlap with our divorce work. I know in some states, family law attorneys or divorce attorneys don't like to touch it. And sometimes we need our criminal attorney friends to come in and help us depending on what the situation is. Yeah. But for me, it's my favorite case type.
well, I mean, it's like wonderful, awful to
Right.
hear.
Well, it's
Yeah.
awful that people need it, right? But
Yep. Same.
right.
Same. It's like, I never ask our people, how are you? Because if you're talking to me, you're probably not
Right.
very well.
An answer and it's not going to be fine. Thank you. How are you? Right. And that's we
Yeah.
care about people though, right?
Yep.
And
Yep.
that's
Yeah. So thanks, Melissa, for coming back. And the last time we had like a conversation, not including just a few minutes ago, New Jersey did not have coercive control laws, and that was something that we talked about
right.
when we did our lunch and learn, and it was a little bit controversial because here in Connecticut, we have Jennifer's Law, and now New Jersey just passed coercive control laws, but you would think that everyone would be for coercive control legislation, especially with domestic violence background, but I remember, the lunch and learn, there was some debate about it. And so I'd love to hear the other side because during the testimony for Jennifer's Law, there were people who were heads of domestic violence agencies that were protesting Jennifer's bill turning into law because they felt like it might harm victims. So tell us what you think about these coercive control laws, both sides if you want.
Yeah, I definitely don't want to speak for my friends and colleagues who were down in Trenton and really deep involved in the bill. I respect those people so much. That's certainly not me. I think people may have had a feeling that it would be restrictive for judges, and I know there was some talk about including coercive control or some bills introduced as one of our predicate acts. So in New Jersey, I don't know if it's different. I'd love to hear you tell me what happens in Connecticut, because if people don't know, that's where Lisa fought hard to get these laws into place, right? But we have enumerated acts that people think of like as crimes, so words they would think of as a crime like assault, harassment, criminal mischief, criminal restraint, and you have to select one of those. So the facts of what happened to you to lead you to get a restraining order, you have to check one or more of those boxes. So if somebody, let's say it's repeated calling and text messages, and so that may be harassment, and then obviously an assault, self-explanatory. But some people have both of those things happen in an incident, and you have to pick that when you get a temporary restraining order. So I think there was maybe some debate as to whether coercive control would become its own separate predicate act, which might lead to proof problems, or coercive control comes in as part of the overall picture, which is where it lands.
Yeah. So coercive control, I don't know if you or I should talk about some of the things that it covers, because when Connecticut did it, it basically expanded its legal definition of domestic violence. And I am not an attorney, so I don't use legal terms. I just use layperson's terms and the way that we understand it. So normally in the past, to get a restraining order or for the court to look at abuse would be the threshold of physical harm or imminent threat of physical harm. And that's what I think a lot of society still thinks of when they think of domestic violence, is like, were you
in Connecticut, it was only physical harm or the threat of physical harm?
That's what I understood. I know I tried to get a restraining order for my daughter, and they were just like, it doesn't meet the standard. And it was talking about physical harm or threats of physical harm. And this was several years ago. But again, I'm not an attorney, so don't quote me like exactly. So when Jennifer's law passed, it now the court has to look at all the invisible abuse that a lot of people don't seem to take as seriously who don't have a background in this. And so that can include like financial abuse is big, emotional abuse, verbal abuse, stalking, legal abuse, that's our favorite, sexual abuse, something called revenge porn, which is threatening to publish sexual images of someone if that person doesn't do what they want.
Like our friend Lindsay's there, the expert there, right?
Yeah, that's right. Lindsay Lieberman, that's right. Yeah, so, and digital abuse, cyber stalking.
Cyber abuse, right.
Right. And I probably missed like one or two, but that's the main thing. So what we liked about the Jennifer's law and the coercive controls being turned into legislation is now the judges have to look at the bigger picture when they're determining restraining orders or custody situations. So that the safety, not just did you get hit? Are you getting threatened to get hurt?
Right. I think one of the things that's interesting, and I always find this to be fascinating when I talk to my friends who practice family law in other states, is in New Jersey, a final restraining order is forever. So you get a temporary, and then after your face, and then after the hearing, or the goal of the hearing and the result is whether someone has a final restraining order or not. And in New Jersey, I think it's taken maybe, and that's another reason for against coercive control when you think about it, is a restraining order is forever here. And so the court really has to take it seriously as to the basis upon which they're granting it, right? Because that has long-ranging consequences. Then a defendant who has a restraining order against them has to go on the registry. You know, there's certain jobs that can be lost, as you know, as a result of that. So here, I don't know, I think compared to some other states where they have a 1-year restraining order and then it's reviewed, probably maybe it's not, I don't want to say it's not taken as seriously, but the considerations are different, because sometimes I think 1 year, everyone cools off, and then maybe the court doesn't extend it after that. But here, once you have one, it's forever.
No, and I haven't heard from any of our clients who are all over the states and the world of any other place where it is that serious. We've also had clients who have gotten restrainers against them in New Jersey, and they're like, this has ruined my life. Is there a chance that I'm just getting this overturned? I said, I don't know. Talk to a New Jersey attorney, but have you ever heard of cases where restraining orders have gotten overturned?
I mean, obviously we have the appellate division, so certainly if there is an error, you can take your case on appeal from Superior Court to the appellate division. In New Jersey, there is a case that established elements that you could come back later and file a motion to have a restraining order vacated. I remember many years ago when I was a law clerk, we did hear one such motion, although the person ended up consenting. They had obtained the restraining order back when they were about 18, because you had to be 18, but they were young, high school boyfriend and girlfriend. And years later, he wanted to apply to, I believe it was the police academy. And
Wow.
he couldn't do that. He felt he made a mistake in his youth. And I remember my judge asked him to find her and see if how she felt about it. And then everyone came in for a consent conference and she ended up agreeing.
Wow.
And, there are agreements you can also do in the state of New Jersey. I'm not sure about Connecticut, to agree to stay away from each other or limit contact. They don't, have the force of a crime if they're violated, but I think they ended up doing something like that. But there is a motion you can file. I do believe they're granted sparingly.
Yeah. I mean, we've definitely heard of like no contact mutual stay away orders in various places. Yeah. But people often do agree to that because they know that it can really harm the other person's job or ability to pay child support. So it's kind of like, well, what's the goal?
Always that double-edged sword, right? If you have a police officer, they lose their gun or they could lose their job. At certain places, attorneys can have ramifications, ethically speaking, right? From a domestic violence restraining order. I'm sure there are other places, go on the registry, it has certain effects, whether there's licenses you apply for that you wouldn't get or jobs. So it is something, at least here, to be taken very seriously. And I think that's another reason when you consider adding things to the statute, you really have to weigh that, right? Because I think for a lot of people, that coercive control is so, scary to introduce because some of that is the very invisible abuse we don't see.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you were talking about the like a sheet where people check a label off something to say, this is what I'm applying for.
Yes.
In my mind, just as like a strategist, I feel like it's always about show, don't tell. So we try to limit the use of labels and focus more on describing patterns of that person's behavior over time and the impact it has, if it's a custody thing, on the child or your relationship with the child or all of that, but not just words. So it's just like saying, we don't say the word narcissist. Some people don't say the word abuse. We don't say alienation. It's like, just show it and let the experts draw their own conclusions.
Right. That's a fair point. So in New Jersey, you have to check one of those off. Obviously, our most all-encompassing, we call it a predicate act, is harassment, because harassment says right in the statute that they're looking for patterns of things that happen over time, and also the intent of the accused in committing those acts. A lot of what we see in harassment is the multiple phone calls, the multiple texts, the multiple emails, the showing up places and intimidating. All of that did usually fall in the harassment section because the others are a little bit easier to, neatly wrap up, like an assault, right? Much easier to be criminally restrained, right? Held against your will, or criminal mischief, right? The destruction of property. I'm using layman's terms, but right? Easier to prove. Harassment dealt with the patterns, a lot of what you're talking about. I do think if people were just coming in on an emotional abuse, they would be looking for, our harassment statute has, if the restraints on communications, if they're made in an alarming manner, in using foul language at inconvenient hours, that's what harassment says. So I think some of that emotional abuse might fall under that, but that would be more maybe like through text. A lot of what we see, is the texts.
I bet.
Right?
Yeah.
How much?
As you're describing this, I'm thinking about a situation that happens a lot with people we know, and that's where there's exchanges with the children, and one person can sometimes be very intimidating, and male and female, I'm not just talking male, but come up to the car and sort of hover. And we've had clients say, can I get a restraining order for that? but when I interviewed a man named Stephen Dana, who was from New Jersey, and has a nonprofit called Protection from Abuse, he said it's that might be hard to get, like someone just kind of lurking, probably not in New Jersey. I mean, what do you think about that?
What we try to do when we have, usually that, as you're saying, arises in a custody context, depending on the ages of the children, we try to do certain things, whether we have as many pickup and drop-offs be of the kids directly at school. So there's no parent upon parent contact, which for some people is problematic. They want their kids to come home first. You know, then there's logistical concerns. Where do I put the bag? Where do I put the things I've packed, right? For the little kids. How's their lunchbox coming home? You know, I still have a little one, so thinking about all the things, right, you would do. But we try to do that. Obviously, our worst case scenario is people transitioning the children at the police department, but we do have cases where that happens. You know, we do have cases where kids have to be transitioned when there is a restraining order. And in that situation, right, sometimes, especially if we have little ones, don't forget, we have people handing off babies. We have people handing off kids in car seats, kids who can't get themselves in and out of their booster seats yet. Those are the hard ones, right? Because otherwise, we try to do curbside pickup and drop off, right? The parent who is, the child is leaving, stays in the house, watches the kids walk. The parent who's receiving the kids doesn't get out of the car, and there's no contact. That's in my opinion, our best case scenario in these situations. Your problems again become when you have kids too little, to get themselves in the car.
As you're talking about this, I'm thinking about something recent that happened with someone we know. So let me just get your take on it as long as I'm thinking about it, which involved a car and a child being transferred. So in the car was a couple. One was a new partner, and then the ex was outside of the car, and the child was young, but certainly old enough to walk out of the car. They were supposed to stay in their own cars. There's no formal order, and this is not New Jersey, by the way, but just out of curiosity. The ex who was out of the car, who happened to be female, started getting very angry at the new female partner and got into a screaming fight with the kid. The kid got out of the car, was missing, let's say, articles of clothing from the feet, and they were left in the car. And then the ex got into the car after like screaming and almost kind of borderline threatening. And then it turned into this like, get out of the car. Why are you in the car? And luckily it didn't get physical, but I thought this is not good, obviously, around the child. But what about someone who is where there's no restraining order, but entering the car where it's already like...
I mean, I probably would have a client get a temporary restraining order in that situation under harassment grounds. I mean, and I know, you know, there's no real basis for this, but that's when we talk about the intangibles. That's real boundary violating, right? And maybe if you're represented by counsel the first time, counsel just sends a warning letter and counsel tries to work out a better way. But if it happened more than once, I would send a client for a temporary restraining order, at least to diffuse the situation. Don't forget, New Jersey, obviously this is not an optimal scenario, but New Jersey is a one-party recording state, which differs than a lot of others. A lot of our proofs come in the form of audio or video recordings. And unfortunately, in circumstances we see in that case, which is terrible, people recording the transitions, and sometimes that's why people want to exchange in the public place or at the police station,
right,
because they have the cameras.
Yeah, I would say most of our clients have exchanges at police stations.
Yeah, I mean, well, if you're dealing with, right, mostly high conflict individuals, that makes
only
right some circumstances, not only for the person who feels scared, also for the person who feels falsely accused.
Exactly.
But never best for the kids, though.
I know. That's what's the awful part. All right. So with the coercive control laws, sorry, go ahead, Melissa. Your volume went off for a second.
It's like a little scary, right? It doesn't always feel, hey, I'm at the police, I feel protected. They feel like, hey, I'm at the police, something's wrong here.
Right. And you think of all the associations that a child has.
Go ahead, sorry.
So No, it's okay. So with the coercive control laws, like what do you think is actually going to change now in New
I
Jersey?
think so. In New Jersey, the good thing before this is the court always was able, my camera is like turning dark, I don't know why, able to consider what we call the totality of the circumstances, and had factors and elements that the court could consider other than just that predicate act. The most important one being whether there's a prior history of domestic violence, and it says right on the form whether you reported it or whether you didn't, right? Very important,
Oh,
because what
wow. That's huge.
what do we know about most victims, statistically speaking? It takes them, what I think are the seven
7 to 9,
times
7 to 9 times, I believe.
before
Yeah.
actually going forward with the restraining order, whether they are getting them and dismissing them as part of the cycle of violence. So we were always able to do that. And I think that's where New Jersey's, I think, always a step ahead, because the court was always able to consider the totality of the circumstances. What
Oh, wait, Melissa, your volume.
losing battery.
Yeah.
That I'm losing battery. That
Oh,
the
no.
could look at the whole picture. And so that was wonderful, because I think in the past, I've tried to introduce information as to exactly what later becomes coercive control over the years. And we would do that by looking at the past history. A lot of times I would have people say, whether there was like a taking away of all the credit cards and the debit cards and locking up the checks, right? For some people, it's financial. We've got to be very careful, right? It's not, hey, my husband brought in the Nordstrom bill and told me no more purses this month, right? That's why we have to be careful, right? That's not financial abuse. We're talking about people with no access to money, right? I've seen them, right? People come to this country from elsewhere, maybe they don't have a checkbook, they don't have a credit card, they can't leave.
Right.
That's what the feeling person is, right? In a lot of coercive control, they can't leave.
Yeah. Yeah.
How to put a label on that. And what does that mean? Because like for some people who don't understand domestic violence, they think like, oh God, how could there ever be somebody who can't leave? But you and I know that's very real, whether it's a financial right control, or what other words we use. Control is the word we use in everything, right? So all concept of control, but isolation or deprivation, or what are we talking about before? Constant threats of litigation. I know this is your big area of expertise, is legal abuse.
Yeah.
And what happens in that? False allegations, right?
All the time. I mean, false allegations are the world of the police, the legal system, and that's why it's so tricky, because of these groups that believe that it's all men are abusers and all women are victims, or vice versa. Because in the court system, from interviewing attorneys, they're like, I see it on both sides
New
all the
Jersey
time.
is such a, in my opinion, I know not everybody would agree, but a gender neutral state. I've a very, very, in all the cases I've experienced in all the courts in North Jersey here, giving everybody the same fair shake, right? I've seen it. I'm just involved in a case recently where I represent the defendant who's was accused of harassment, and nothing he did was close to that. And that's very important to me, right? Is to represent somebody for whom the statute is being used wrongly.
Yeah.
And we were victorious in that case by, using, you try to use proofs. Sometimes there's no proofs, right?
That's what I was going to say. When you said about how it with the new thing with domestic violence, whether or not it's been reported, people are often like, but I don't have anything. I don't have evidence. I don't have police reports. And I always say I'm not a lawyer, but I believe that your testimony
Yes.
is your credibility as well. And that's something that the judge will look at the whole picture. And sometimes they'll be like, but I don't, I'm making this whole case. I have all this stuff, but I don't have everything. And I'm like, to me, it seems like it doesn't have to be like everything has to be done perfectly. It's more of like, does the judge believe you or the other person?
So, you said such an important word, which is credibility. And we talk about this, or I do when I represent somebody. I give every person I walk into the courtroom this same discussion. Not everybody is able to do it. Not everybody does do it. But your demeanor in the courtroom is sometimes almost as equally important to what your proofs are presenting. You know, what I see, defendants who keep their cool, who are not rolling their eyes, who are not gesticulating and gesturing wildly. The court is watching, and I have had multiple judges when they're making a determination at a domestic violence recently. One wonderful judge in Essex County just made such thorough findings about how, while the plaintiff was speaking, she watched the defendant and how he, you know, was calm and cool throughout. He wasn't shaking my arm, or right, because the court is looking, right? If someone's accusing you of being abusive, if you sit in the courtroom and act abusive, what is the judge going to think?
Right. Yeah. So the tricky thing is our clients tend to be really emotional. They cry and they get angry and they often get bullied on the other side. And so we really stress when we go over presentation how important it is to be as calm as possible. And I'll say to them, I'm not going to tell you to calm down because that's inflammatory, but how we can help you is to help you stay really focused and organized so you know what to expect. So you're not blindsided by what everyone who doesn't know what's coming is shocked by, like, they were lying and they were attacking me and they were saying, it's like, but you still have to stay as calm as possible because we want them to like you so that they believe you. But we know that you're often up against a manipulative con artist who, those people love going before an audience. True. To understand that and just say, I have to work even harder. And to understand the strategy is to get me in an emotional state so that I won't be able to speak or my thoughts won't be clear. Right. And we have so just to train for it ahead of time. And look at the judge, at the judge. You don't have to look at the other party, make eye contact. Obviously, sometimes that's hard because you have a case where one person's represented and the other person isn't. Then maybe you're getting a situation where the self-represented person can cross-examine the victim. I recently had that. The judge asked the questions, made the defendant direct the questions to her, and she filtered the questions to my client, who's the the plaintiff. So there are ways where, listen, it's hard. And when you say, the preparation is the key to any case. That's hard for people who are self-represented. Obviously, my bent is different. I say if you can afford an attorney in any capacity in a domestic violence situation, it may be the most important place to put those resources is to a domestic violence situation. For that reason, it's very hard to represent yourself in a domestic violence case because of the emotions involved. And if you're abused, I don't know. Yeah. We actually just heard of something really interesting today from another state where they have something called, I think it's called an informal trial, and both parties have to agree. The rules of evidence don't apply. You're not allowed to cross-examine. Basically, each part, I know I had never heard of this before. It was it? Does anyone know? Utah. Oh. So people have to submit their evidence ahead of time in the form of briefs. The judge is able to read it. And so usually both parties are pro se, but the judge is the only one that asks the questions, and hearsay is admissible. I was like, really? Oh, I've never heard of something like this. All right, see what's going on. That seems a little strange. Is it more like a consent conference? Like everyone has to consent to it? Well, I was told they both had to consent to do it, and then I thought, okay, all right, we'll see what happens. But I've never heard of something like that. But I was told that it was because so many people are pro se that it makes it less scary, and the fact that the judge can ask the questions makes it easier for people. So I thought, I wonder if Utah is getting some domestic violence education. I have to say, I don't even know how a plaintiff, a self-represented plaintiff, can make it through a hearing. I think that if they're a real victim, I think that's hard. And obviously we have a lot of programs here, for people who can't afford those kind of services from an attorney, because that's how important I feel it is, right? It's like re-traumatizing to go through it all over again, because for a lot of people
retelling the story is, for some people, too much to bear. And that's why some people dismiss it. I mean, if there's something to, a lot of people who are physically assaulted or sexually assaulted, right? That's almost too hard for some of them to speak about in a courtroom.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so another thing I wanted to touch on is the coercive control laws and men.
Oh.
So we have a lot of male followers. We also have a number of male clients. And sometimes when they hear about these coercive control laws, I think they don't quite understand and they feel like it's another strike against them in the legal system. So can you talk about that a little bit?
I thought that was so interesting when you said that to me, because obviously you speak to a much broader audience of people who are putting their cases together. I mean, we have, compared to our divorce cases, obviously the domestic violence cases are, much less frequent, thank God.
Yeah.
You are talking about people who are in this, you are regularly talking to people who are in this situation all the time. I found that fascinating that you said men are, they have a lot of anticipatory dread about this type of law. And I'm guessing it's probably because the control factor is so prevalent throughout it. Maybe their assumption is that the court would say stereotypically that women can't control in the same way as men. Old thinking process about men being able to physically empower women. To them, I would probably say that coercive control is not about the physical control.
That's what I was, yeah.
Is that what you were thinking?
Yeah.
We didn't talk. That's why, because we have statutes that cover that via assault or criminal restraint or something of that nature. And I think maybe that's what it is. They hear the word control and their mind goes to like physically controlling someone. But no, I mean, women can engage in the same thing. I mean, I think maybe also too could be something about earning potential and power dynamics in that regard, right? Because maybe they think women don't have the ability to control men from a financial perspective as much as the reverse.
So what we see in terms of women controlling men is a lot of it is threats. If you do this, I'm going to keep the kids away from you.
Oh, it's a classic. That's the classic example. Obviously, before we came on, we were talking about courts starting to get wise to constant false allegations as being a part of this pattern of abuse, right? We know that New Jersey has come out now a little harder against false allegations or constant allegations to what we call DCP&P, our Child Protective Services here in New Jersey, right? False allegations. I mean, what's scarier than the threat of losing your children? So I think these things are what now is going to be able, with this new verbiage, to be introduced more than it could have in the past. I mean, obviously, I think you got 10 false allegations to protective services, maybe you have a harassment claim. But don't forget, in the state of New Jersey, when you get a temporary restraining order, often the court will temporarily suspend parenting time. I don't know if
right.
that happened in Connecticut too, or the other states that
I think most places, and that's what makes it so difficult, because of all the false allegations. The court generally, from what we see, wants to be safe no matter what. So there'll be at least 2 weeks
right
before, depending on how soon they can get a trial. In California, it tends to be a little faster from what we've seen. Other places, it can take months before you have an opportunity to be heard. And that whole time, you can't see your kids. And these are some of our most heartbreaking cases, because they're like, I didn't do anything and nobody's let me talk. And in the meantime, my kids don't see me. They're getting the message that I'm this unsafe person, and it's destroying our relationship. And how am I going to recover?
Yeah. I mean, I think the genesis of that initially was, at least in New Jersey, the final restraining order hearing statutorily was supposed to occur within 10 days of the issuance of the temporary. So I think the court was of the mind, hey, if we have 10 days or less, maybe anybody could go, without that contact until we all get in the courtroom and we see what's going on. Post-COVID, we are not seeing the courts, with no fault of the courts, have the ability to they just don't. And we have judicial vacancies in New Jersey, and places where, although domestic violence is a number one priority in family court, right, to get domestic violence courts fully staffed, but that 10 days is not a reality most of the time. And then if somebody wants an attorney, the court will extend that time period because, of course, everyone should have the right to counsel. So that 10 days becomes more. What we used to see 15 years ago, 20 years ago was more a suspension of the parenting time if the kids were involved or witnessed the incident, right? If there was obviously an assault in the presence of the kids, you aren't going to see your kids. But I think it's just kind of circumstances have created this much longer delay, which makes it tough. You can do a parenting time appeal here in New Jersey. If you're restricted for your parenting time on a temporary, you can go into court and appeal it. And many times we see people either achieve like temporary supervised time to at least have contact until the court knows what's happening, or parenting time added while they're waiting for a final hearing.
Wow. Okay. This is really helpful because I'm thinking of one client we have in New Jersey in particular dealing with this. And that person's talked about like DCP&P court also. Is there a court separately for that besides? Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think some states might have that. I don't think we have that here, but I don't know.
Okay. So you met Victoria when you were at our office. She does all DCP&P work. That's what she does. Yes. We always have at least one, if not two judges in every county, depending on the size of the county, that deal with just the Child Protective Services calendar all day, every day, whether it's coming in as an emergent application for kids to be in the care and custody of the division, or, to temporarily live with a family member, or one parent versus the other. Yeah, that's what she does for a living. And we do. I mean, listen, I think we have a wonderful court system. So, but yeah, that takes priority also with the domestic violence cases.
Yeah. So what's interesting in the case that I'm thinking of is there's that court, and then there's the family court, and the stuff that happened in DCP&P court, like there's no finding, there's no problem, but the family court is waiting for information, and the other court's like, oh, you surely have it. And so there's more delays. And of course, our person is getting so angry and frustrated at the injustice, and our clients dealing with legal abuse and everything that comes with it. Sometimes they just get to a point of despair because they feel like I'm turning to the justice system for relief, and it's just making things so much worse.
I know. I'm sorry. I'm really losing power. I'm sorry. Yeah, I mean, that does happen. And that's why I think we're going to start to use the coercive control. I think when there's a very significant legal abuse or a significant amount of false allegations, obviously one doesn't do it, and they don't often down very hard on who is being false, right? Unfortunately for clients, and we see this all the time, you probably see this all the time, most people don't walk out feeling that sense of justice with quotes around it,
right?
That want to feel. They may come out with the right result, but people don't get the slaps on the wrist that they do. Someone's writing about the DCP&P court, I'm seeing in the comments.
Yep.
Yeah, no, I know.
Do you want to address that?
It is definitely. Yes.
All right. Yeah. So the comment is DCP&P court is horrible. They are a mess. In New Jersey, they mess with mothers who do their jobs, and the moms on drugs and worse get away with it.
I mean, listen, I'm going to plug in a battery here. We have a lot of people who do have problems dealing with those systems. All I can say, another situation where an attorney is very helpful. It is a very different type of court system with different rules and regulations. And if you don't have somebody who really knows how to go, at least in New Jersey, I don't know how it is elsewhere, but to mine through that particular experience, I think is very difficult. Because the court in those cases is in a tough spot, right? Does anyone want to be the judge who errs in that kind of case?
Yeah. So let's, I know you haven't read through everything, Melissa, but just before this our meeting, you had noticed some new headlines. So this new coercive control law went into effect in January in New Jersey, but there's more.
Right.
Can you just read us a couple of other things without knowing and going into detail? Like, because some of it's really interesting.
I would love to hear from people who even know more than we do, but I was looking at the different versions of the bill for coercive control, and we were looking for what is now very new statute. We were looking for the language, but I found so many other interesting ones, including a new rule to issue restraining orders in other languages besides English and Spanish. I looked at it more after we talked, that there are, I think I said 10 more languages they were going to introduce. Now, at least in New Jersey, we have interpreters either on staff in the courthouse, or they can be ordered from a central location if you're not, a Spanish speaking. Usually we have Spanish speaking interpreters in every courthouse, but there are obviously languages where they have to order an expert for certain languages. So we came across a new bill that expands the languages upon which they get to issue restraining orders, which I thought was great.
Yeah.
And we found something else, right? A bill that says that if there's a pregnant victim, that the restraints can be extended to the child once they're born.
Once they're born. So amazing.
We like to be proud of ourselves in the state of New Jersey, right? I mean, it just feels good that there are people out there looking out for victims. It also feels good that there's other people out there vetting these laws and, making sure things aren't too restrictive and go the other way, right? So some of your clients say like, oh my God, I feel like this is automatically against me. So we have to have that balance always, right?
Yeah.
But I thought that one was amazing. There are others introduced about getting mental health treatment for victims covered by insurance, which you would think would just be
a given.
Right?
Right. Yeah, I mean, you had said something about you saw one of them covers counseling for kids in households where domestic violence is present.
Right.
We have that at our local domestic violence center, but it's limited to just that center. But to have it as law, I mean, that's incredible.
I see something introduced. It's just introduced. So I'm looking at the bills introduced to include animal cruelty against a victim's animal, which quite frankly, if that ever happened in one of my cases, which I haven't seen, I would include that under harassment if that happened, right? If, pet's a family member, and if somebody were intentionally cruel to the animal, I think that in New Jersey, at least, that would fall under our harassment statute.
See, that's so interesting, Melissa, because in a lot of places, I know in Canada, because we had a client dealing with a pet that was like a high conflict divorce over, and it was custody of the dog. There was like 2 dogs and like a lot of chaos surrounding that. And the dogs were considered household property. So there was no way to work out like a custody thing because the dog, but here it sounds like, the pets are given more of a value, recognized.
They still consider pets like personal property, which does give us a very difficult, if you had to go to court and determine it. But I think a lot of times if the people can handle it, we do. If someone's not willing to give up the pet, we've done plenty of sharing of the animal, or the animal going back and forth with the kids on the parenting time schedule. I had a case in recent memory in that regard, of course, that you can expect to share the pet's expenses, right? But
these are things that people who are not in it have no idea to even think about.
Right. It's true. And listen, what do we always say, right? We learn every time something new happens in our practice, right? So we don't know. But we saw all kinds of new bills introduced. There's different things about, what law enforcement records have to be kept and how they're provided.
You talked about number 2310 stood out about health insurance.
I have to go back and find that one.
Okay, but it was something you had said something about now. I think it's a bill about health insurance being considered medically necessary to treat victims of domestic violence, but you'll have to double check on that. And these are just like quick headlines, everyone, that Melissa was looking at when we met right before getting on here, so she hasn't had time to go into detail.
We're looking at what they list the bills as what's been introduced and what's been passed. And we like to look at, of course, what's been passed, but it's also interesting to see what's introduced, right? Because then we kind of know sometimes things that are introduced are a little bit ahead of their time.
Yeah, yeah. And the other one that you had mentioned that I could relate to was something involving domestic violence and college. And I know in my own situation, I felt like there was financial abuse towards my children because my ex refused to submit his
Yes.
financial information to the school. And schools require, most colleges require financial information from both parents. So if one parent doesn't cooperate, it effectively makes your child not be able to get financial aid, which restricts them from their choices of college. So my son was really limited in which colleges would accept him regarding financial aid because his father wouldn't give the financial thing. So we did something called a non-custodial parent waiver, where, and a lot of schools wouldn't accept it, but where you had to argue why the college should only look at the financial records of one parent. And I know one school in particular, I won't say which one, but my son really wanted to go there, and they said, well, if you've seen the other parent like once in the past year, then that counts as like you should be able to get the records from them. But they didn't understand that the one time that he had seen his father, he was begging for him to give the records, and he said no. So we were still stuck. Luckily, we were able to have like two colleges that did consider the non-custodial waiver. One of them was the University of Connecticut. So I'm hoping that most of the public colleges will consider that, because it really puts kids in these high conflict situations in a tight spot. They're stuck, and why should they be further victimized financially by an abusive parent that's trying to get back at their ex-partner and putting the kids in the middle?
I find that somewhat crazy of the colleges too. Like, what kind of proofs are they going to require, or what are they going to accept? Is it just a certification of the child?
No. So with that, and that's, I'm glad you asked that. So what from what I remember, I had to get letters from the Domestic Violence Center showing how long that we had been involved with them, so that it wasn't just suddenly when he was applying for college. Luckily, I had that. We had police reports that we submitted, and then my son had to write something as to why he was asking for it, which I like, thinking back, that was kind of hard. Like, why should a kid have to, like a 17-year-old have to argue
18,
yeah,
right? Like,
about like why you should please just, I'm already in this terrible situation. Like, he had to write it himself too. So it was bad.
That a judge in New Jersey at least would, if you had to go into family court, provide assistance, or an order or something to you or for you. Because, right, if you filed a motion or an application or a petition, whatever it's called in your state, for cooperation, what's the other party gonna respond with? No, I'm not cooperating. Well, that helps you.
Well, you know what? That's exactly what happened. So when I went for the educational support order, the divorce happened when my son was a freshman. My lawyer said, go back when he's like a junior, and you make sure you involve your ex as much as possible in the college process. So we had the paper trail. He wasn't interested, other than being difficult, as you can imagine. And so we got the educational support order. My son was a senior, and then he was supposed to contribute a certain amount, and he just refused. And so we were back in court, and the judge was even saying to him, if you do not reimburse for these, then your son is going to have to leave this school. And that's what happened. And I kept saying to the court, you got to make him pay, because our son's going to have to basically drop out. And that's what happened. And it was just like, oh, we're really sorry. But when you say to people who've got issues, like, if you keep doing this, your kid's going to have to drop out, that's what they want. They're not like a regular person who's like, oh, I care so much, or we wouldn't be here. And that's why it's so important for people in these positions of power to understand that the dynamics of these cases are fundamentally different. They're not logical. So those arguments don't work with people who are taking advantage of the system. And by not coming in with clear penalties and punishments, deadlines and consequences, it basically emboldens people to keep taking advantage of the system. So things actually, I felt, got worse for a while, because the court allowed my ex to get away with this behavior and didn't swiftly nip it in the bud.
Is there not a mechanism to?
Oh, Melissa, you lost volume again. Still can't. All right, so I heard you say, is there not a mechanism to what?
Like to take the money from like a wage garnishment or something?
Later, it took years. So it was like during that time, we had to scramble and like he had to leave this one school and try to get into another school and all this other stuff. And it was just like, that was what I spent so many years in court over, is like the education thing. Like, how could this have happened? How could the court have allowed this to happen, where this kid is the victim
Right.
of financial abuse through education? Like, you would think that everybody wants their child to get a good education if they have access to college, and they have a part of the whole educational support order was proving that the kid would be able to go to college, that his grades were good enough. I mean, my son was the speaker at his graduation, and to have that happen, it was just like such a travesty.
Right. Well, everybody would think everybody would do that until you spend your time in family court, and then you see, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is why it's always so hard for family court judges. I know people, they have a lot to say about family court judges, and in many circumstances it might be true, but it is, I think, also a hard job. You know, you have to think of, if 25 people come before you a day, right? 2 times 23 are lying, right? I mean, it can be a challenging job to suss out.
Yeah, but I think one thing that's helpful, besides hopefully this new legislation, is for people to understand how to make a really powerful case as much as possible. And for me, one thing I learned, and this is what we advise our clients, is when you write a parenting plan, when your lawyer writes a parenting plan, when you have proposed orders, there has to be enforcement language written in, so that the judge, that when you go back to court, that there's a clear path, that the judge is like, okay, there's a deadline and there's a consequence. And so it's right there. Connecticut does not have currently deadlines and consequences. And so that's one thing that I argued really hard for, that I was able to get. And I'm hoping that the judge and the judges, because there were several who oversaw our case over the years, could start to understand that in cases like mine, where there is obviously long documented patterns of coercive control, specifically financial and legal, that they have to make orders with very clear deadlines and consequences, so that enforcement will be easier. And it's not just like, oh, let's keep giving it a chance, like not may or reasonable, but like shall. Right. This shall happen.
I find that just unbelievable that at some point the college doesn't accept the reality of the circumstance. You know, at some point you would think that that would have an impact on financial aid, but I imagine that's a different.
Now New Jersey, like, I'm excited to hear that New Jersey is considering things.
The bill is introduced to establish a domestic violence tuition waiver program. Why don't we look into that? We'll see what happens. Keep our eye on it. I don't know what it is, but I had a question. This is your area of expertise, and you were starting to say to keep a record. I heard you say keep a paper trail. If you were advising someone, because I was jotting down notes while we were preparing, on how to present a case of coercive control, what would you be telling them to do as they prepared? What would you be telling them to bring as proofs?
Oh my gosh, Melissa, this is a hard one. So often, like, we separate the domestic violence stuff from custody, and custody is like the biggest stuff that we deal with. And so coercive control is often a part of it, but we focus more on understanding the best interest factors, and also understanding something we call the alienation factors, and separating. So because so many of our clients are dealing with custody, we'll say, let's talk about how what your ex has done in terms of their patterns of behavior over time, and the impact, the visible impact that it has on your kids, as well as your relationship with your kids. And in the process, we teach something, you know, Melissa, called strategic communication. We're saying you're writing to your ex, no undocumented communication. So in writing only. Great to have a parenting app. We just came back from this conference called the Amicable Divorce Network Conference, and I have to talk to you about that.
Okay.
But anyway, there was a representative from Our Family Wizard, and he was talking about how he's like a cybersecurity expert also, and knows Lindsay Lieberman.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that was crazy. But anyway, he was talking about how now with AI, texts can be manipulated and emails could be manipulated. And he went through and showed us how and told us this crazy story. And it was like, oh my gosh. And so he talked about the necessity of using parenting apps that have software that will not allow things to be manipulated. Because, you know, the way our world is, like, we don't even know what's true anymore. And it's very hard. And from speaking to other cybersecurity experts that we've interviewed, specifically someone named Vance Long in New York, it's like our technology is going so fast that we can't even keep up with it. So it's like we're constantly like reacting to things instead of getting ahead of it. And so our Family Wizard is one of those parenting apps, which is now seems like they're on top of things where you can't, there's like stuff when now you can do phone calls, and there's transcripts of phone calls through our Family Wizard so that things, whatever. It just, yeah, it helps document things really well. I know our Family Wizard tends to be more East Coast. Some of our clients in different places use App Close or Talking Parents or, oh my gosh, there's one like that sounds really nice about parents. I can't think of what it is, but anyway. So strategic communication and writing only through a parenting app if possible, so nothing can be manipulated, where you're presenting as the best co-parent ever, and you're writing to your ex, but you're really writing with the idea that the audience is the invisible judge, minors counsel, attorney for the child, guardian ad litem, etc. And so you always need to be conscious of what we call being under the court's microscope. And so it's not just presenting properly in court, it's presenting properly outside of court. And so again, like doing things, well, a lot of it, you know, this is like obviously a big topic, but understanding what language to use and what not to use, but thinking like people are going to see how I look and I cannot lose control of myself. I have to be conscious of those best interest factors and not just what I want and what I feel is right, but the values of the court and what they are going to be paying attention to. So it all comes down to like being educated, understanding what matters and what doesn't matter. So you're not wasting time and money and energy putting together like thousands of pages of documentation about things that nobody, not that it's not important, but it's not something the court can actually do anything about.
Targeted. And if people don't know, that's really Lisa's and her partner's specialty, is honing in on, right, your most important documents, your provable truth, and getting organized. Whether you're working with a lawyer or you're not, your service is equally helpful for people who are not working with lawyers. Not that you're giving legal advice, but you're helping them. But we all know that we're helping them target the
strategize, right? And being a writer, right? And I was a high school English teacher. I loved teaching the art of persuasion. And so we do a lot with the art of persuasion and psychology and what makes you more credible. Right. You know, what makes you likable? How can you strengthen your argument? Like this goes back to me teaching the hamburger essay, the 5-paragraph essay, like your intro, your conclusion, what are your 3 most important points and where is your details to support those points?
Right. One of the things we often tell people to do that we find credible is to keep a calendar, right? People like to keep it in their phones. I'm an old-fashioned paper person. If any of my coworkers are saying, they're going to be laughing. But if you had calendars for years and years, and if you're presenting evidence, you're a witness, and you can either refresh your memory of what was happening 4 years ago on a specific date, has a lot of credibility, as opposed to, well, this always happens, right? We always have a problem with it. This always happens. You never, right? And we see people fall into those problems or those patterns. It feels like that to people, right? And people are telling the truth when they say that, but we often have people keep the journal of whether it's the misparenting time or a violent incident or whatever, and then keep their records that go with it, whether it's text or email. Or in New Jersey, I always say recordings, recordings or phone messages, bad, always people leaving the phone messages, or leaving the text. I mean, I even had one domestic violence case recently where a judge just looked right at the plaintiff and said, like, why didn't you just block? And but not in a bad, I'm not going to say.
Oh, not in a bad way. Okay.
Yeah, like, I mean, at some point, like, they didn't have a child together, but
okay.
Like, just block. But we all know you can't do that if you're a parent. Yeah. But like, I mean, right? So you've got to find a way to stop the communication, but those communications are our proof.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and that's the thing is to remember it all seems to come down to credibility. Whatever you have that makes you believable.
Right.
Because lies only go so far. I mean, we know, there's people that get away with stuff for a while, but then it comes down to time passes and what do you really have?
Right.
People can mask it for a long time and then they fall back into their patterns of behavior. So it's really playing the long game and getting the support and stamina and getting excellent attorneys and having hopefully like coaches and strategists who can make you great clients for those attorneys, and you're not bothering those attorneys too much with your emotional stuff that your attorney really has other things to do, but we can help with that and, have a good therapist.
Well, that's the key, right? Because I feel it's not that your attorney, if you have a good attorney, they do care, right? And there are attorneys who don't, but it's just that we're also not trained in the mental health piece. And we always try to make sure there is a therapeutic piece on what we call our team, right?
Yeah. It's a team. That's the thing. It's a team, especially with these domestic violence cases.
Yeah.
You need a team.
A team, whether we're helping people find a support group or we're helping people find someone like you, or we're helping people find therapeutic services or services for their children, or listen, if it goes further and there's a substance abuse issue, right? What do we always say? Go fix it. Don't deny it. Go fix it and meet it head on. Don't, right? You see that all the time. Don't conceal it. Try to pretend, right? We have people come to us, plenty of people who are afraid to go to therapy or afraid to go on medication. I'm sure you've seen that.
Oh, all the time. They're like, I am so scared that my ex is saying I'm an unfit parent and I was on anxiety. I'm like, everybody's on anxiety medication, especially after COVID.
I say there's two people, right, about therapy, two people, or people who are in therapy and the people who need it, right? We always say that's right. That's what it is. And, we try to encourage people to get that help. And that's not going to be used negatively against you. Obviously, if you have a very severe psychiatric history, then the court has to consider the safety of children always. If it's something, but people who are depressed because they're getting divorced, I think court may think there's something wrong with you if you're getting divorced and you're not, right? It's divorce.
Yeah.
And
yeah. I mean, we often talk about like nobody's perfect and people go through things, but sometimes when you go through something like, let's say you had an addiction and you dealt with it and you got sober, that you might end up looking better to a judge because it shows that you have the capacity to work on yourself.
Get yourself the help you need. You're not in denial about what your issues are. The court hates that, right?
Right.
And your kids, listen, people always think their kids don't know. The kids always know what is happening in that regard, whether they're too young for the verbiage of or be able to tell the difference between the alcohols or whatever. They know when a parent is impaired, and they're going to tell, right, until they get to a certain age. They're going to tell their parents. So we never advocate concealing. We always advocate meeting a problem head on.
Yeah, but it takes a lot of courage.
It does, and it takes the team, right? It takes the team behind you to tell you if things are, what things are okay and who to have as part of their treatment team.
Yep. Yeah. So, oh my gosh, Melissa, we went over an hour.
Okay. And then we're going to say goodbye.
Yes, for now. But thank you so much for coming on and talking about this. It's always wonderful seeing you. Maybe one day we'll meet in real life.
Oh, I know.
We're kind of close-ish.
I would say we're going to do that. I'll email you and tell you when I think we're going to over the summer. Okay.
Okay, good. And also, before you go, can you tell people how to find you? And by the way, thank you so much, because some of what we talked about today is going to directly impact a couple of our clients in New Jersey, and they're going to be thrilled to hear what you talked about.
Yes, so we're at Seiden Family Law, Seiden. Lisa knows because I know you guys heard her talking. Her and her partner did a wonderful lunch and learn here for myself and the other attorneys here to teach us some about what they do. And you can contact me via email. Lisa, you can maybe link if you want to link or tag Seiden Family Law when you post it.
Yep.
But our number.
Yep, I have been.
I know. Wait, 324-5400, but Or you could get in touch with Lisa and she'll,
Yes, definitely. But
not just for clients, but we always like to meet, right, our divorce attorneys in other states. That's right when we make our network.
yes, and I'm going to be talking to you about Amicable Divorce
Okay.
Network too, because I think you'd be perfect.
All right.
All right. Anyway, thank you so much and have a great time.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Okay. Okay, my pleasure. All right. Talk soon. Bye.